I watched the stove's smoke turn back into my boy's face, and I knew I could not open the door without losing our heat. My ration note sat on the table, and outside the blizzard kept sealing the chimney mouth with ice. Luke's black soot handprint stayed on the wall, where he slid down coughing. So I set my hands to clay and earth and a shallow ground draft, and listened for the fire to draw clean. December 1874. Colorado Territory, on the timbered rise above the little town of Elk Pass. A one-room cabin sat back from the wagon track, half hidden by spruce and cut stumps. Winter had already tightened the air. Snow lay crusted where the sun could not reach. Wind worked through the branches like a slow saw. Inside, the cabin lived by a small iron stove, a cot, a table, 2 chairs, and shelves made from rough boards, and an oil lamp hung on a nail by the door. A narrow window looked out toward the pass, already turning white. Viola Mercer was 60 years old. Her hands were thick with work, the knuckles cut and healed over many seasons. Luke was 10, long-limbed, quiet, and still growing into his bones. She was his caretaker, his builder, and his provider, because his mother had vanished downriver 2 springs ago and never came back, and his father had died the previous winter after a fever that left him too weak to stand at the woodpile. They had 36 hours of split pine under the eave, and half a tin of kerosene, and 4 days of cornmeal, if she kept the spoon honest. If the stove smoke failed to leave the cabin, they would choke, or they would be forced to open the door and freeze in the same night. A first warning showed itself in a simple way. The morning draft did not pull clean. Smoke curled low instead of rising, and a dark line of soot gathered along the pipe seam where it met the collar. Luke coughed once, then again, and rubbed his eyes until the corners went red. On the table, Viola kept a small ration ledger. The page was torn from an old mail circular and backed with cloth. In pencil, she had written, December 3rd, meal, 4 cups, beans, 1 handful, wood, 1 armload. It was plain, and it was how she kept fear from turning into waste. Out past the window, the sky had that heavy look that meant snow did not come as flakes. It came as weight. Wind shifted to the north. A dry and cold slid in behind it. Viola moved the kettle to the stove lid and listened. Not for drama, for the sound of the fire drawing right. A good stove talked upward. This one talked sideways. Luke watched her eyes, as if her face could explain weather. A small scarf was tied around his neck, with a knot she had taught him to make. His boots showed patches on both toes. On the shelf above the bed, a scrap of paper held another note in pencil. Boot patch, left toe, 18 stitches, right toe, 16. She counted them, because thread was as real as food. Near midday, she put on her shawl and stepped out. Snow squeaked underfoot. She pushed her glove along the door frame where she had marked the season. A charcoal line sat at 14 inches. She added a new mark with her thumbnail at 16 because it had climbed overnight. At the chimney, the trouble showed itself. Ice had rimed the cap. Not a thick plug yet, but enough to change the mouth of it. A wind struck the top and shoved cold air down like a hand. A chimney could be a throat. A throat could be closed. She scraped what she could with the back of her knife. A few brittle pieces fell and shattered. That helped, but not enough. Cold did not bargain. It waited. Luke stood in the doorway, staying in the light. "Is it bad?" he asked. "Not bad," Viola said. "Just wrong." She did not teach him to panic. She taught him to notice. By late afternoon, the first thin snow began. It came sideways. The pass disappeared, then returned, then disappeared again. Viola filled the water bucket and set it close to the stove so it would not skin over with ice. The stove smoked again when she fed it. A low puff came out at the pipe joint. It stung the eyes. It left a bitter taste on the tongue. Luke coughed, the kind that reached down and pulled. Viola opened the door a finger's width. Cold sliced in. The smoke thinned. The heat ran out with it. She closed the door again and looked at the stove like it was a stubborn animal. After supper, she made a note she did not want to make. December 8th, smoke heavy, draft weak, cap icing. A line like that was not a complaint. It was evidence. Night came early. The oil lamp lit a circle on the table and left the corners dark. Outside, wind thickened the snowfall into a moving wall. The cabin began to creak in the gusts. Just after 9:10, by the little wind-up clock on the shelf, the stove gave a stronger back puff. Smoke rolled low, gray and hungry. Luke stood up too fast. He took one breath and folded over, coughing into his sleeve. Viola reached him in 2 steps. She pulled him toward the wall, where the air was usually cleaner. His shoulder struck the boards. His hand went out for balance and landed flat in soot on the plank. A black handprint stayed there, sharp as a stamp. Luke slid down, coughing, eyes streaming. That handprint would remain long after the night was done. Viola set her palm on his back. "Slow," she said. "Breathe slow." She cracked the door again, and the wind tried to take it from her. Snow blew in, stinging her cheeks. Heat fled. Smoke thinned. Luke's coughing eased, but his lips looked pale. She shut the door and made a decision that was not large in words. It was large in effort. "We fix the draft," she said. "Tonight." There was no time for a perfect repair. There was no money for new pipe. Elk Pass might as well have been 100 miles with that storm at the door, and she would not carry a 10-year-old through a blizzard with smoke in his lungs. She gathered what she had: a shovel with a worn handle, an old clay pot of mud she had kept damp near the stove for cracks, a short length of stovepipe she had saved from the last summer's patchwork, a bundle of split boards leaning by the wood stack. Luke sat on the cot, wrapped in a quilt. His eyes followed her hands. The room smelled of smoke and warm wool. Viola pulled the stove out from the wall, just enough. The pipe rattled. Soot sifted down like black snow. She wrapped a cloth over her mouth so she could breathe. The joint where pipe met collar had gaps. Not wide, but wide enough to let smoke escape when the draft went wrong. She pressed clay into the seam with her fingers. It felt cold and gritty. She smoothed it, then pressed again. But the work was slow because she was careful not to crack the pipe. Luke spoke once, quietly. "Will it stop?" "It will help," Viola said. "Then we give the smoke a better way to go." The ground under the cabin was frozen on top. Not deep, not yet. Viola had seen men do a thing at campfires when wind fought the draw. A shallow trench. A channel that guided air, making a pull. It was not magic. It was simple pressure and direction. Near 10:30, she opened the door and stepped into the storm. Snow hit her face like thrown sand. Wind tried to turn her. She planted her boots and found the place under the stovepipe where the cabin's skirt boards met earth. She worked the shovel down, breaking crust. The sound was a hard scrape. She dug a shallow channel, no more than a hand's width, and angling it away from the cabin, toward the lee side where wind was less savage. Each scoop came up half snow, half dirt, and fell in a small pile that immediately began to vanish under new snow. Her fingers numbed. She flexed them. She kept going. A ground draft channel did not need to be deep. It needed to be clear. Inside, Luke watched through the window. The lamp made a small glow behind him. He held the quilt tight, as if he could keep warmth from leaking through his elbows. Viola came in with snow clinging to her sleeves. She stamped her boots. She did not sit. She took the split boards and began shaping them by feel and habit. A wind hood, low and angled, could shield the chimney mouth from a direct shove of wind. It could also create a little pocket where air moved faster, pulling smoke up. She had no tin cap to shape, as she had boards, a hatchet, and nails pulled from old crates. She cut 2 boards to lean together like a shallow roof. She notched another to brace them. Each strike of the hatchet was measured. Not angry, not fast, just sure. By 11:15, she tied the hood pieces together with wire. The wire came from a broken trap spring. She twisted it tight with pliers until it sang. On another scrap of paper, she wrote, 11:20, hood wired, clay joint set. It was a stove repair note with time, the kind a careful person made because memory got thin when sleep was thin. Luke's breathing sounded better. He still had a rough edge to it. Now and then, he swallowed like his throat was sore. Viola poured him a spoon of warm water with a pinch of honey she had saved in a jar. Not much, just enough to coat his throat. After midnight, the storm became a full blizzard. Wind rose to a steady roar. Snow pressed against the door seam. The cabin felt smaller, like the weather had hands on all 4 walls. Viola put on her coat again. She took the hood outside. She moved by feel more than sight. The world had no edges in a blizzard. It was all moving white. At the chimney, she found the cap half buried in ice. Her scraping earlier had been undone. She cleared it again, faster now, because she understood the fight. Then she set the split-board hood low over the cap, angled to the wind, and fastened it with wire to the pipe brace. The wire cut into her gloves. She ignored it. She did not have spare gloves. Snow tried to fill the hood as she worked. She brushed it away. She tested the hold with a tug. It held. Back inside, she pulled the stove into place. Clay at the joint looked smooth. It would dry by heat. She fed the fire carefully, not too much at once. A stove could puff smoke if it was shocked. For a long minute, nothing happened. No back puff, no curl. The smoke went up. The stove began to talk upward again. Viola let out a breath she did not turn into words. Luke looked at her. He did not smile. He simply stopped coughing for a while. At 3:40, she woke to a different sound. Not the wind, not the stove. A thin whistle at the pipe seam, the kind made when air pulled hard through a small gap. She got up and touched the pipe. Warm, steady. She held her palm near the stove door. Heat came clean. No sting. No bitter taste. The draft was holding, but it was pulling so hard it could dry the clay too fast and crack it. She made a note in pencil. 0345, draft strong, a watch seam. Evidence mattered in the dark. Luke slept with his mouth slightly open. His cheeks had color again. Viola checked his forehead. Warm, not feverish. She tucked the quilt closer under his chin. Before dawn, the blizzard pushed harder. It threw snow against the window until the glass vanished behind white. The door rattled. The cabin moaned. Viola stayed awake, feeding the fire by small pieces, keeping the draft steady. A visible consequence came with the cold. Frost began forming on the inside wall, near the floor, like white feathers. That was the truth of their shelter. Heat rose. Cold crept low. If the fire failed, the cabin would become a piece of ice. By first light, there was no true light. Only a grayness that told her the sun existed somewhere. Snow had drifted halfway up the door, and she could not open it without digging. Luke woke and coughed once. Dry, not choking. His eyes went to the soot handprint on the wall. He stared at it. "Is that mine?" he asked. "Yes," Viola said. "And it means we don't forget what almost happened." She made him drink warm water again. Then she gave him a small piece of salt pork, measured, not generous. Food was fuel. Fuel had to last. On the shelf, a flour sack sat folded. It had a tag tied to it with string. She had written in pencil on the tag, "Elk Pass Co-op, 25 pounds, November 1874. It was her way of not being fooled by a short-weight sack. She had learned that lesson from men who smiled while they cheated. Near midday, the wind eased for a short spell. Not calm, just less brutal. Viola took the shovel and began clearing the door. Snow came off in heavy slabs. The drift had packed hard. She worked a channel, enough to open the door a crack. Cold rushed in. She closed it again and caught her breath. Luke tried to stand. His legs trembled. Viola put a hand on his shoulder. "Sit," she said. "You'll help with the small things." He nodded, ashamed of being weak. She did not let shame grow in the cabin. She handed him a scrap of cloth. "Wipes soot off the window frame," she said. "Slow. Count your strokes." Small tasks made a boy steady. That afternoon, the draft faltered again. Not full smoke, just a hesitation. A little cough of gray at the stove door when she opened it. Viola felt it in her eyes. The hood outside was filling. Ice was building again. She could not go out every hour, not in that wind. So she looked for a second defense. She chose one unusual method, not fancy, but real, an earth berm wall, not a full dugout, not a new house, a simple bank of earth and packed snow against the windward side to cut the bite of wind and keep the cabin's base warmer, so cold air would not drop down the chimney so hard. By late afternoon, she shoveled snow and dirt from under the eaves where ground was not as frozen. She packed it along the north wall, waist high at first, then higher. She tamped it with the shovel blade until it held. She pressed sawed scraps against it where she could find them under the drift, pieces she had cut and saved by habit. The berm made the cabin look half buried, like an animal under snow. It was not pretty. It was shelter. Luke watched, wrapped in a quilt, and called out when he saw her stumble. She did not tell him she was tired. She told him what he could see. "My legs are old," she said. My mind is not." At 5:20, she came in, shaking snow from her coat. The cabin felt less exposed. The wind sounded farther away, even though it was not. That was what a berm could do. It changed the way sound and cold struck wood. Viola lit the lamp and pulled the ration ledger close. She wrote, December 9th, berm north wall. Wood, 18 pieces left. Meal, 3 cups. The pencil was short, worn to a stub. She sharpened it with her knife. Luke leaned over the ledger. "Can I write?" he asked. "Not tonight," she said. "Tonight, you listen and rest." He looked disappointed. She added, softer, "Soon." Promises had to be kept, or not spoken. That night, the stove ran steadier. The ground draft channel helped. The clay seam held. The hood did its work as best as boards could do against ice. After midnight, Luke woke coughing again, but it was a small cough, not the choking fit. He put his hand on the wall and felt the soot print under his fingers. Viola heard the sound. She sat up. "How is it?" she asked. "Just scratchy," he said. She checked the pipe seam. No smoke. She checked the chimney sound. A steady pull. She made a note anyway. 1:10. Luke cough. Draft okay. Some nights, the only comfort was proof written down. On the second day, the blizzard settled into a long siege. Snow did not stop. It simply changed speed. The cabin's window became a pale square. The world beyond was erased. By midday, Food became a visible worry. Cornmeal was low. Beans were fewer. Salt pork was nearly done. Viola measured with a spoon, not a guess. She poured 3 spoonfuls into the pot and leveled each one with her finger. Luke watched the pot like it could betray him. Viola gave him a task again. "Count the wood pieces when I bring them," she said. "You will say the number aloud." He did. It kept him present. It kept her honest. That afternoon brought social pressure, even with the roads closed. It came as memory and as debt. Viola had a trade chit folded in her Bible. She took it out and smoothed it flat. It read, in a firm hand, "Elk Pass Mercantile, credit, $1.10, Mercer v." The merchant, Mr. Halverson, had given it with a smile that never reached his eyes. He had said a woman should not run a claim alone. He had said credit was for men with strong backs and strong signatures. Viola kept the chit because it proved what was owed. She also kept it because it proved what she refused to beg for. When the storm eased briefly near 3 o'clock, there was a knock. Not at the door, at the cabin's wall, muffled through snow. A voice called her name. Viola opened the door a crack. A man stood there, half white with drift, hat rim iced. It was Ira Mercer, her late husband's brother. His eyes darted to the berm, to the chimney hood, to the shovel marks. "You've turned this place into a burrow," he said. His tone held ridicule. "It keeps the wind out," Viola said. He shifted his weight, impatient. "You're behind on the note," he said. "Halverson says you're asking after meal on credit." "I don't ask," Viola said. "I trade." Ira's mouth tightened. "Town talks," he said, "and town decides." He leaned closer, lowering his voice. "You're sitting on a claim that could be sold. You and the boy could be moved into a room above the store. Warm, fed. That's better than a widow freezing in a shack." Viola kept her face calm. She had learned not to show a man the exact place his words landed. "We're not for sale," she said. He glanced at Luke, who stood behind her, wrapped in a quilt. The boy's eyes were sharp, not fearful, watching. Ira pointed at the soot handprint on the wall, visible behind Luke. "What happened?" he asked. "Smoke," Viola said, "and then work." She did not offer more. Ira's laugh came out like a cough. "A woman playing blacksmith," he said. He reached into his coat and pulled out a paper. "Come spring, if the note isn't settled, I'll file for the claim," he said. "It'll be legal." He held the paper where she could see the seal. Then he tucked it away before she could read the fine print. Threat did not need to be loud. It only needed to arrive. Viola nodded once. "Go on," she said. "The storm's not done." He hesitated, as if waiting for her to soften. She did not. He left, disappearing into the white. Luke's voice came small. "Can he take it?" "He can try," Viola said. "We'll keep our proof. And we'll keep breathing." That evening, the draft faltered again, and this time it showed a clear consequence. Smoke did not roll in a blanket. It came as a sting at the back of the throat. Luke rubbed his chest and looked scared despite himself. Viola knew the hood outside was icing. She could not step into that wind again without risk. So she changed the fire instead of the weather. She burned smaller, hotter pieces. She opened the stove damper in a careful way, letting heat climb the pipe faster. Hotter pipe meant less ice hold at the mouth. She did not say it like a lesson. She did it like survival. At 7:40, she checked the clay seam. A thin crack had begun at the edge. Not wide, but a warning. She pressed fresh clay over it, smoothing it flat. Her fingers left prints in the mud. She wrote a note. 7:50, seam patched. She pinned it with a nail above the stove, like a small sign to herself. Luke's breathing eased. He sat at the table and traced letters on the ration ledger with his finger. He wanted control over something. Viola gave him a small gift of it. "Write the time," she said, pointing to the clock. "Right when we fed the fire." He took the pencil stub carefully. He wrote, slow and crooked. 8:10. Wood. It was not pretty. It was proof. And it was his. A day later, the blizzard finally broke its hardest teeth. Wind dropped to a cold hush. Snow still fell, but gently, like it had tired. At first light, as Viola opened the door fully for the first time in days, a wall of snow stood outside, nearly to her waist. The world was smooth and quiet. Trees looked like white statues. The pass was only a suggestion. They dug out the path together. Luke carried small scoops in a pan. Viola threw heavier loads. Each breath steamed. Their arms burned. Work made heat. By midday, she decided to go to Elk Pass. Not for pride, for supplies, for standing, for proof in other hands. Luke wanted to go. His cough had mostly faded, but his lungs still sounded tight when he laughed. Viola listened to him. "Not today," she said. "You stay warm." He argued once. She shook her head once. He understood the language. She strapped on her snowshoes. They were rough, homemade frames, laced with rawhide. On her belt, she tied the trade chit, the ration ledger page, and a folded cloth with soot marks. Evidence had to travel. Before leaving, She looked at the soot handprint on the wall. She did not wipe it. It was ugly. It was also a reminder. She traced it once with her finger, then left. The path to town took hours. Snow swallowed the old track. Viola followed fence posts and tree cuts she remembered. She moved steady, not fast. A 60-year-old woman did not win races against winter. She won by not stopping. At 2:30, she reached Elk Pass. Smoke from chimneys rose in thin lines. Horses stood with their backs to the wind. People looked smaller in heavy coats. At Halverson's Mercantile, bells tinkled when she entered. Warmth hit her face. The air smelled of flour, leather, and kerosene. Mr. Halverson stood behind the counter with his sleeves rolled. He looked up, surprised. His eyes flicked to her boots, to her shawl, to the snow on her shoulders. "Mrs. Mercer," he said. His voice carried politeness like a thin blanket. Viola set the trade chit on the counter. She set the ration ledger page beside it. Then she set the soot-stained cloth down. Not dramatic, just clear. "I'm here for meal and a length of pipe," she said. "And a tin cap, if you have one that won't ice so easy." Halverson's eyebrows rose. "A tin cap," he repeated. "You got money for that?" Viola did not lift her chin. She did not lower it either. "I've got proof," she said. She tapped the ration ledger. "I've got work." She tapped the soot cloth. "And I've got a claim that's still mine." She slid a small pouch forward. Inside were 2 silver coins and a handful of worn coppers. Not much, but real. Halverson glanced at the soot. He did not want to touch it. "What's this?" he asked. "Smoke backdraft," Viola said. "Luke nearly went down." She kept the words flat. "Blizzard iced the cap. I made a ground draft channel and a hood from split boards. I'm here so it doesn't happen again." A man by the stove in the store snorted. "A woman tinkering with flues," he said, loud enough to be heard. "Next, she'll be shoeing horses." Viola turned her head slightly. She did not glare. She simply looked. "I'm not tinkering," she said. "I'm keeping a boy breathing." Then she faced the counter again. Silence settled, heavy as flour dust. Halverson cleared his throat. He picked up the trade chit. He frowned like the paper had offended him. "I can give you meal," he said. "Pipe costs. So does a cap." Viola pushed the coins forward. "Then sell," she said, "and write it down." He hesitated. He was a man who liked power more than profit, but profit still spoke. He took the coins. He scribbled a new note and tore it off a pad. December 15th. Mercer, 10-pound meal, 1 pipe length, 1 cap, Paid. He signed it. He handed it to her. Viola read it twice. Then she folded it and tucked it into her Bible. A new proof detail, made by another hand. On her way out, a woman near the bolt-cloth table caught her eye. Mrs. Danner, a widow herself, older, with hands like cord. She nodded once. Not a speech, just recognition. Outside, Ira Mercer leaned against a post near the hitch rail. He had been waiting. Snow dusted his shoulders. "You went to Halverson," he said. His voice held accusation, as if shopping was a crime. "I paid," Viola said. She did not stop walking. Ira stepped in front of her. You can't keep this up," he said. "People say the boy's sick. They say you're burying the cabin in earth like a dugout. They say smoke's pouring out." Viola looked at him. "I've got his handprint on my wall," she said. "That's what they don't say." She did not raise her voice. The calm made him blink. He tried a different angle. "You need a man on that claim," he said. "A woman alone makes folks uneasy." "Let them be uneasy," Viola said. "Better than dead?" He opened his mouth to argue. A gust of wind cut him off. Winter did not care about his opinion. Viola stepped around him and kept going. The walk back was slower with supplies. The meal sack was tagged. She checked the tag twice. 10 pounds. She carried it like it mattered, because it did. The pipe length banged against her hip. The tin cap sat wrapped in cloth. By 5:10, she reached the cabin. Luke opened the door before she knocked. His face held worry that had not turned into tears. He looked at the meal sack like it was gold. Viola came in and set everything down. The stove was burning low. Luke had kept it alive, just as she taught him, feeding small pieces and keeping the damper halfway. "You did right," she said. He exhaled. His shoulders dropped. A child carried too much in silence. Praise, when earned, was a kind of food. That night, she replaced the old hood with the tin cap. She set it carefully, fastening it with wire and nails, sealing edges with clay where needed. Outside, she cleared the chimney mouth as best she could. At 8:30, she watched the stove's behavior. Smoke went up. Heat stayed in. No sting. No bitter taste. The cabin felt like a place meant for breathing again, and a visible consequence arrived in a good way. The frost feathering on the lower wall melted. Moisture darkened the boards. Warmth had moved lower because the berm held the cold at bay. Small engineering, simple and believable, had changed their odds. After midnight, Luke coughed once and went back to sleep. Viola wrote, 12:20, quiet, draft steady. She folded the note and pinned it beside the earlier one, a small wall of proof made from scraps. Days passed in a steadier rhythm. Snow still came, but not as a prison. Viola kept the earth berm, tamping it when thaw and refreeze made it slump. Luke kept the ration ledger with her, writing times and counts. Every 40 or 50 lines of their life, winter threw a consequence. A boot seam tore. Luke's right toe patch loosened. They counted stitches again and repaired it by lamplight, as a hinge on the door squealed and began to pull loose. Viola replaced the peg with a thicker one and wrote, January 2nd, door hinge pegged. A water bucket cracked at the rim from freezing. She melted the edge by the stove and bound it with wire until she could trade for another. One morning, near 6:10, the stove draft slowed without smoke. Viola noticed the sound change. She did not wait for coughing. She went out, cleared the cap, and checked the ground draft channel, digging it open where snow had packed. Prevention was quieter than rescue. In late January, Ira Mercer returned, not in a blizzard this time, but on a coastal clear day. His coat was cleaner. His confidence came with the sun. He stood near the berm and frowned. You've made it hard to see the cabin, he said. Folks say you're hiding. I'm blocking wind, Viola said, and she kept splitting kindling as she spoke. A woman with an A did not need to prove she belonged. He held out a paper, a formal-looking sheet with town ink. Sheriff says your claim boundaries are unclear, he said. Could be challenged. He watched her face, hunting for fear. Viola wiped her hands on her apron. She went inside and returned with the Bible. She opened it. Out came the merchant's signed note, the ration ledger pages, the trade chits, and a small sketch she had made of her boundary stakes with measured paces between trees. On the sketch, she had written, Stake to stump, 27 paces. Stump to creek bend, 41 paces. She had learned that a woman needed numbers, not arguments. Ira's eyes narrowed. You think paper beats men? He asked. Paper beats lies, Viola said, and I'm not alone. She nodded toward the path. Mrs. And Danner stood there, approaching with a basket, having come up with 2 other women after hearing talk in town. They were not friends in the soft way. They were allies in the practical way. Ira's jaw worked. He looked from the papers to the women to Luke, who stood steady by the door now, breathing clean. He could not threaten easily with witnesses. I'll be back come spring, he said, softer. So will I, Viola said, and I'll still be here. He left without another word. The rest of winter became a lesson Luke would carry without saying it. Work could be quiet and still be defiance. A warm room was not only comfort, it was survival earned. By late February, the snow mark on the door frame had risen to 22 inches and then began to settle. Viola added each mark anyway. By March, the mark began to drop. Mud showed in patches, and the berm slumped. She repaired it until the ground thawed enough to let it fall on its own. When spring came, it did not arrive as a trumpet. It came as drip sounds from the eave. It came as softer wind. It came as Luke running outside without coughing hard afterward. One afternoon, near 4 o'clock, they took down the soot handprint, not by scrubbing it away like shame. Viola took a cloth and wiped the wall gently, leaving the faint shadow of it. Then she wrote a final note and pinned it beside the others. April 6th. We kept the draft. We kept the heat. We kept the boy. Luke read it slow. His finger traced each word. He looked up. "Can I keep the papers?" he asked. "Someday," Viola said. "For now, they stay where we can find them." In May, the sheriff came, called by Ira's complaints and town talk. He stood outside, looking at the chimney cap, the berm, the ground draft channel, the repaired pipe seam. He looked at the boundary sketch. He looked at the trade notes. He looked at Luke's patched boots and the careful ledger. He was not a poet. He was a man who respected proof because it made his job simpler. "She's on her stake," he said, and that was all. Ira did not come back after that. He found easier targets. Halverson did not become kind, but he became careful. Mrs. Danner and the other women kept visiting, not out of charity, but out of a new habit of checking on each other when storms rolled in. Viola kept the tin cap all summer, cleaning it when soot built. She kept the ground draft channel clear, even when it seemed unnecessary. A person who had almost lost breath did not forget air. Luke grew taller. He learned to read the stove's voice, and he learned to check the seam and the cap. He learned to write times and notes that meant something. On the cabin wall, the old soot stain faded, but the place it had been remained visible if you looked close. In the next winter, when the first storm pressed its cold hands against the cabin again, Luke did not wait for panic. At 7:15, he stepped outside with a small brush and cleared the cap. At 7:25, he checked the channel. At 7:30, he wrote it down. Viola watched him from the doorway. Her face stayed calm. Warmth lived behind her eyes. Some families passed down land by deed. Some passed down tools. In that cabin near Elk Pass, they passed down a quieter thing. They passed down the habit of noticing first, then the habit of fixing, then the habit of proving what was done. If you want more calm, realistic frontier survival stories like this, subscribe and stay with us.